Up first is calendula oil and aloe vera gel. I'm beginning by choosing the jar I want for my oil. I decided on the one which used to be a honey jar. After you make sure that your container is clean, you're going to want to grab your flowers. Calendula comes from marigold flowers, and I actually grew these in my garden over the summer, so it's really cool to be able to use something that I knew I grew in my own garden. Next, I am grabbing some avocado oil. You can choose from a bunch of different ones though, including coconut oil, jojoba oil, sunflower seed oil, the list goes on. You just want to choose depending on the benefits you'd like and also the shelf life. I am uncapping my bottle and pouring it into my jar, making sure that all of the flowers are submerged. Covering them along with the flowers being completely dried will prevent mildew and mold. Lastly, I'm just grabbing this little piece of paper and writing the date that I made the oil on so that I know from after a full month I can use it, and I'm just sticking that to the bottom of the container. Next, raising it up with a few books, I'm going to put it in front of the sunniest window in my house so that there can be heat and light on it for that amount of time to get all of the nutrients out of the flowers and into the oil. You can do this with a bunch of different flowers, but this is a very common one. It's great for skin benefits, and since I used it in edible oil like avocado oil, I could even use it as a salad dressing. Next, I'm going to be using aloe vera gel for a few different things. So I'm going to my aloe plant on my back patio and cutting off a long stalk of it. Next, I am going to put it on a plate, cut it in half so it's a little bit easier to deal with, and then trim off the sides as well as the top layer of skin to get to the gel. I definitely took off way too much from the sides before I took off the top layer of skin. You can definitely take off less than this and it would save you a little bit of the gel. But after removing the top layer of skin, I moved the two remaining pieces to a bowl and just carved out the actual gel. You could also do this with a spoon or a fork. I just decided to use the same knife that I was using and tried to get off as much as possible. Now that the gel was in the bowl, you're going to want to take either a whisk or a fork to kind of stir it, blend it, and crush up the pieces. A blender would be ideal, but with the small amount that I was actually using, it would have just got caught under the blades, so the fork was the best option for me. Next, I added a few drops of lavender essential oil to this to further the benefits and also add the nice smell. Not all of the clumps were broken up, but for what I was using it for, it wasn't a huge deal, so I put a little bit in a few spots of an ice cube tray and the rest in this organic baby food jar, the latter of which will last up to a week in the fridge, so I put a expiration date on it, and then the frozen bits will last a few months. These both have great skincare benefits, and I've been using them for sunburn ever since I can remember. My mom has always had a plant on hand, and the frozen pieces are super cooling and relaxing to use on your face. Next up is edible flowers, and the way I'm going to incorporate this into a project is first by making spritz or spritzer cookies. This is a really easy, quick recipe that you can make with very few ingredients, all of which are these. If you'd like to make the recipe, I would just recommend screenshotting this for future reference. And really quickly, I also want to say you'll see me add powdered sugar and sift it because somehow by looking at the recipe and grabbing the ingredients out of my baking cabinet, I didn't realize, Jordan, you need granulated sugar, and still added powder. The cookies turned out totally fine though and had the same taste that they had when I had made these cookies other times, so it wasn't a huge deal, but I would still recommend using the granulated sugar just so that it's like the correct recipe. Other than that though, after I had all of the ingredients mixed up properly, I then grabbed my spritz cookie press. It's a little copper and silver thing that has some stencils where you unscrew the bottom and place them inside so that when you twist it, the cookie comes out in a certain shape. They're predominantly Christmas themed, but there are a few fun flower and swirl designs. Once I had loaded up my batter though, I'm just twisting the top to extrude the dough onto my non-greased pan. I got this from my grandma. It's super fun to use, but of course you don't need this. You can totally just use the cookie dough like normal. Just make sure that the shapes you make are pretty thin because the cookies are made to be pretty thin, and that's why they have such a quick baking time. By the way, you'll want to preheat your oven at 400 degrees, and the cookies averagely cook for 7 to 10 minutes. Of course, depending on your oven, this is always different. Just make sure that they never quite brown. After the cookies are done baking comes the decorating process, and this is of course course, where the edible flowers come into play. I want to say a quick disclaimer that unless you're using some kind of plant or flower that is very well known to be edible, like roses or a literal vegetable, I firmly suggest that you either remove the flower before eating it and just place it off as a literal decoration and not as an edible item, or do your research extremely well. I personally am going to pull off the flowers, even though I've done my research on them being edible. You also don't know where certain flowers come from, so be careful if you're not growing them yourselves. They can just be so incredibly dangerous, with some colors being poisonous and others not, and people misidentifying things. So please be really careful about this. I am not in any way advocating for you to go outside and place some random flower that you found on any of your food. Please just be careful, do your research properly. And back to the decorating, the way I'm going to use them is by taking some kind of syrup, honey, agave, anything sticky to use to adhere the flowers to the cookie. The first one I'm actually taking a little bud off and placing in the center of this one, kind of sticking it to the edges with some agave. The other one I'm individually pulling off the petals and kind of forming my own little flower that's a bit more flat on this round cookie that I shaped. You don't need a flower to decorate them, of course. You can leave them plain or even use something like sprinkles or food coloring inside the batter or on top. Just have fun with it, and these are how mine turned out. Scrap gardening. It's a really amazing concept where you take either scraps or full pieces of vegetation often and create more of it. So you can do this in water with plants like carrots, celery, avocados, but I chose to do potatoes, which will immediately go into dirt. Don't have to be in water first, but they do need to sprout eyes. Unfortunately, I am on a huge time crunch with this video, trying to get it out for you guys as soon as I can, and the eyes on my potatoes refused to sprout in the limited amount of time that I needed them to do so. So I did have to plant them anyways, and there's a very low chance of them growing this way, so you need them to be sprouted. But like I said, I want to get this out to you guys, so I kind of had to go through it without it being fully prepared, unfortunately. Once your eyes are actually sprouted though, you're going to want to cut the potatoes into a few pieces so that there are a few eyes per piece. Once you've done this, you're also going to want to let them sit for a few days so that the open cut side can dry out before you plant them. Once they are fully prepared though, sprouted, cut, and dried out, I'm going to my gardening space, which I cleared of weeds for this project, and I'm going to dig about a 6 to 8 inch hole in the dirt to then place my piece of potato in, making sure that the eyes are up so it can grow through the soil properly. I'm doing this with each piece of potato about 8 to 12 inches apart from each other. I actually found a little piece of brick when doing this, so I added it to my collection of strange objects on my bookshelf later. But once everything is done and planted, I'm placing in this little marker that I made earlier by taking a popsicle stick, writing potatoes on it with a pen, and then coating that with clear nail polish to make sure that the ink doesn't bleed when it rains or I water them, which I am grabbing my watering can, filling it up with the hose, and making sure I thoroughly coat that area. Like I said, these may not grow at all, but I'm kind of crossing my fingers and interested to see what happens since the eyes weren't fully sprouted. So I'm going to be posting updates on a new Instagram that I made specifically for this channel for, like I said, updates or similarly related content, what's going on with the videos and such. So if you want to see what happens, you can go check that out if you'd like. Up next are head or hat pieces. I'm going to show you two different ways to make these, but I of course need to forage for my material first, so I'm going around grabbing a few different things. The first one I am majorly grabbing ferns for, and then setting up my basket next to these yellow flowers to begin weaving it. The process is to have one vine, flower, or fern and place it horizontally, then grabbing another one and placing it next to the left side end vertically, and then wrapping it behind and across the other side, continuing this. This is kind of the quintessential flower crown weaving or folding method. I also kind of showed it with some little grass stalks just because I think it was a little bit easier to see than with the really chaotic leaves of a fern. It's kind of hard to see exactly what's going on. So this is a little bit easier to see demonstrating the folding method. But once you get all the way around, you'll just want to tuck it and kind of wrap around the other side for the full crown. You can also, of course, weave in flowers, or if you're doing all flowers, you could weave in vines. I think a combination is really quite fun. I added a few different colors in the end to mine. And the second way, if you don't have a plant that would do well with this folding method and maybe slip out or just want a different method, you can actually use wire from wire-bound books if you want to take out the pages for them to be individual leaves, or if you're just done with a notebook. I do this all the time and use the wire for quite a lot of different projects, and you'll basically just want to kind of fold it in the shape and size that you want and then wrap things on top of that. It just makes things a little bit easier easier since you already have a flexible base to work off of. Either way, both methods work fine. I think it's so fun doing different plant projects like this throughout the whole video because people living in different regions have access to different things, and it can just be so fun to experiment with different materials. With that said, these are how mine turned out.